Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Skokie Village Board for January 6, 2025. This evening, we will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by our village clerk, Manal Desai.
Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Sudker?
Here.
Trustee Robinson?
Here.
Trustee Kuhn?
Here.
Trustee Johnson?
Here.
Trustee Pierce-Slovan? Believe is participating.
We need a motion
Okay,
first.
okay. Trustee Klein? Here. Mayor Van Dusen?
Here. The next item will be a motion to permit the participation in this evening's meeting remotely by Trustee Pierce-Slovan. A motion would be in order. Trustee Klein, seconded by Trustee Kuhn. Call the roll on the motion, please.
Trustee Sudker?
Aye.
Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes.
Trying to say something.
You can't hear?
We're working through the hearing issue.
Okay. She can't hear that we're working through the hearing issue.
Next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. Motion is in order. Trustee Johnson, seconded by Trustee Klein. One item I want to clarify, under reappointments zoning board, there's a misprint. It identifies Brian O'Donnell as vice chair. It should be as chairman of the commission. Is there anything anybody wishes to have removed? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sudker?
Aye.
Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Slovan? Okay. Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes. With that, I want to thank and congratulate the members of the boards and commissions who approved this evening. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
We did get it done. Thank you. Next item is report of our village manager, a much anticipated report, I might add. John Lockerbie.
Thank you, Mayor Van Dusen and trustees. Good evening, everyone. The report this evening is regarding the work of the Stormwater Task Force that has been underway for some time, so it's a pleasure to be able to report this evening. In the early 1980s, the original Stormwater Relief Task Force was created to find a system to control stormwater runoff within the community. The village installed a unique system of restrictors and street berms which limit stormwater from entering the system at peak flow or in significant rain events. This system provided protection against a 10-year storm and was effective at reducing basement backups. However, in the decades since the original stormwater management system was completed, our region has experienced more intense storms more often. This means the existing system can no longer provide the same protection it once did, not because of inadequate system performance, but because storm patterns have shifted. A new stormwater task force was created following two significant rain events in 2020. The task force has worked closely with village staff and Christopher B. Burke Engineering, modeling the village's stormwater management system and identifying recommendations to further manage and improve our stormwater management. I want to thank the task force members for their hard work and time and effort dedicated to this important project. In addition, in the recent community survey that was presented to the board last month, there were several questions related to stormwater management. 74% of the residents completing the survey rated the quality of the village's stormwater management positively in 2024, which was up from 52% in 2003. 94 and 98% of the respondents, that's 2021 and 2024 respectively, support village investment in enhancing stormwater management systems to mitigate flooding. And then 25% of the survey respondents experienced basement flooding in the last 5 years due to weather. So this evening, a presentation is going to be provided. Max Slankard and Russ Rietfeld, the Public Works Director and the Director of Engineering, are going to start the presentation. Tonight is intended to be the initial presentation of the task force work and all of the modeling and recommendations regarding our stormwater management program, and that will be further considered as part of the village's capital planning and budgeting efforts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Russ and Max.
Good evening. As John said, my name is Russ Rietfeld. I'm the Director of Engineering. Public Works Director Max Lankard and I had the pleasure of being the staff liaisons to the Stormwater Task Force. We wanted to make sure to take a time to thank the members for their time and effort with this process. The members, Anwar Haq, Dick Lanyon, Joanne Haberlin, braved the elements to be with us tonight. Krish Mohip, Mary Petruka, Sam Lewis II, and Alex Schuneman. The task force was charged with assessing the existing system and working with Christopher B. Burke Engineering and Max and I to make recommendations to the system if warranted. To tell everyone more on this, we have Jeff Julkowski from Christopher Burke Engineering. Thank you.
This isn't on, is it? Is this the mic on? It is, okay, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Russ, as you mentioned, my name is Jeff Jelkowski. I'm with Chris Burke Engineering. And we're looking forward to presenting some results of the work we've been doing over the last several years to give you some insight into some of our findings. A little bit about the existing stormwater management system. We'll start there. As several of our speakers alluded to, you know, a lot of times, we at Christopher Burke, we do a lot of these studies, a lot of stormwater management studies, stormwater planning, various analyses. Usually it's because the system's been neglected or because there's a lack of information or we don't really know what's going on. Not the case here. We've had overload of information because of really there was a ton of investment that was done in your system back in the 90s. Right? You have a very extensive system, as has been spelled out here, inlet restrictors, street berms, underground storage tanks, trying to do a lot to hold the water back before it can be released into the sewer system. As I'm sure you all know, you're on a combined sewer system, so the same pipes carry our stormwater and our domestic waste, so they're very sensitive to, you know, the amount of stormwater that enters the system. An important point here, the last sentence here, the existing system, when it was designed to provide a 10-year level protection. Meaning in theory, it would be approximately once every 10 years where you would get flooding. And that flooding we're talking about is basement flooding, right? When the sewer system backs up and backs up into people's basements, that's the type of flooding that we're talking about. Okay, this slide just shows some of those elements. I think we all sort of know what detention ponds look like, but as a reminder, they can be dry, like in the bottom left-hand corner, or they can have a permanent pool of water, like in the bottom right. But when it rains, they fill up and they rise up with water. A lot of these elements are below ground, we can't see them. Things like the storage vaults, the storage tanks, those are underground. The inlet restrictors, we're probably all familiar with that term, but just think of, you know, water enters a street inlet, it collects there and it leaves as like an 8-inch pipe. Well, a restrictor more or less plugs that 8-inch pipe with a smaller diameter hole. So it reduces that 8-inch opening down to, let's say, a 2-inch opening to slow down how fast water can enter the system. The picture on the top right, I guess your left as you look at it, street berms. People may see these, they may think they're speed bumps, but they were intentionally placed there to direct and contain water on the street during a storm event. The streets were designed to intentionally flood to a certain degree, to hold water there as a place to hold it and let it release slowly into the system. That was a part of the system that was done intentionally. And a lot of that infrastructure was built in the 90s, the early 90s. We've kind of referred to that as Stormwater 1.0. It was a recognized need at the time. There was a massive investment that was made to bring the system up to a certain standard. But there have been other things that have been going on over time to the stormwater system. In particular, stormwater regulation, that's an important part of it. You have a stormwater ordinance, any development in the village needs to follow that ordinance, the MWD's ordinance. They place regulations on what you have to do with your stormwater. There's certain requirements that say you need to build certain facilities to hold water on your site to help the system. So all that development that has happened over the years really supplements the system, and it's an important part of it. And there have been other improvements, in like rain gardens such as Devonshire Park, police station, the Green Alley program. These are all things that add some stormwater element to the system. So why was the task force created? John alluded to elements of it. But even with the system that's been in place and has functioned well over the years, certainly over the last decade or so, there's been an increasing experience of high-intensity storms, perception that there's been more flooding, that happens more frequently. And in particular, there were a couple of rain events in May of 2020 that prompted the village to say, we'd like to take a closer look at this. So a task force was created, and the 3 bullets here at the bottom really kind of summarize the role of the task force. And I'll kind of keep referring back to these because they're really the basis of our presentation, our findings here today. First, review the existing system to determine what is your current level of protection. This is the modeling component. So it's looking at what's out there, developing this model of the system, looking at lots of different storm events and saying, what can we handle without basement flooding? That's really point number 1. And number 2, if we don't like that answer, if we don't think the standard level of protection is what we want it to be, let's investigate what would it take to bring the system up to a higher standard. Those are the 2 points I'm going to keep circling back to. And then the third role of the task force is really to engage with us, to review our work. We meet with them. They would kind of guide the process. We'd get feedback from them and input. So those three things are what the task force was created to do. These next couple slides we'll talk about the stormwater modeling. We'll keep it very high level. Obviously a ton of work went into this. We're just going to boil it down to a couple different slides. This slide here shows really there's 3 main sewer districts in the village. A district being it's a comprehensive network, a drainage network that collects water and takes it to a common outfall, a common point. Within you can see those are marked by the 3 different colors, red, yellow, and purple. And within each, if you were to zoom in, those kind of squiggly lines represent the individual, we call them catchment areas or tributary areas. It's really kind of the block by block level. So what drains this intersection versus what drains to that intersection. And there's like almost 3,000 of these. So we looked at it on a very small, minute scale to be able to have a great level of detail. So that's some of the more, I guess, theoretical, if you could, that goes into the model side of it. But then there's a real world side of rain gauges. So we measure how much rain falls in a certain storm event. We measure how much water is flowing in the sewer system and how high it gets. So we have sort of a check against our model to make sure it's not all theoretical. There's a check. We call that process calibration. It's an important part of the process to make sure we have an accurate model. And this slide really kind of encapsulates a lot of work onto one slide to be able to say, all right, we have this model, we run lots of different storms, it spits out a ton of information. How do we put that on a piece of paper to sort of portray what's the result, what's the answer, what is our level of protection? So a couple of things on this slide I want to draw your attention to. The pink lines would be the sewer lines. The sort of multicolored blobs would be, for this particular storm, where does the water pond on the street? Right? We said it was done intentionally. What does that look like? And obviously we're zoomed in at a pretty high level here. But this would show where the water would pond on the street. But really a lot of our focus is what's going on below the surface. Where is that water level relative to our homes and our basements? And so we needed a way to sort of show that pictorially and very simply. And you'll notice that the dots here, the dots represent like the manholes in the system, those points, and they're colored, red, yellow, green. And so we just needed a very simple, intuitive way to depict those results. And what we want to see is we want that water level during a storm to be as low as possible, as far away below street level. The greater that depth, what we call that freeboard. So if the water level is at a certain point, however deep that is below the street, that's our freeboard. So that's, the more we have, the greener it is. That's good for us. We want green dots because that signifies the water level is far below the surface and our homes are safe. As that water level rises, that freeboard gets less and less, the water then can back up to, can get higher than the basement elevations. And of course, we don't know the exact elevation of every home and of every basement, so we need to make some assumptions here. And what's important to notice is that elevation gets higher, those dots go from green to yellow to red. We want green dots, we don't want red dots. And so, to answer circling back to the first slide, our task here is how do we answer what's the existing level of protection? We do this red, yellow, green test on every point in the system. So thousands of manholes. We look at each one, we run different storm events, and we say, is that manhole red, yellow, or green? If you want greens. All right, so we did this for a bunch of storm events, just very simply. For a 2-year storm, almost comprehensively, close to 90% of those structures are green. They have that freeboard that we want. They have that level of protection. As we go beyond that, that 86% number starts to diminish. So in our conclusion is that currently today, we have about a 2-year level of protection. That is right around 2 inches of rain in 2 hours. As a reminder, we said that when the system was designed, Stormwater 1.0, back in the 90s, it was designed for 10 years. So what changed? What's the difference? And the answer really is rainfall. You can see from the table here, as I mentioned, that 2-year storm is 1.9 inches, roughly 2 inches in 2 hours. When the system was designed, let me take a step back, sort of the keeper of the records for rainfall is the Illinois State Water Survey. And they have periodically, but infrequently, updated those numbers over time. So when Stormwater 1.0 would have been designed in the 80s, it would have been using their data from 1976. It was subsequently updated in the early 90s, and then again recently in 2020, what we call now Bolton 75. So if you look at what it was originally designed for, it would have been designed for just over 2 inches, and they call that a 10-year storm. In theory, it would have happened every 10 years. Today, that same storm event roughly is now a 2-year storm. So the system can still handle the same amount. It still handles that same roughly 2 inches in 2 hours. All of the modeling work and analysis really verifies that original design. The difference is that it used to, in theory, happen every 10 years. Now it happens every 2 years. So that was kind of the finding from that first bullet point. What's our existing level of protection? The second was, what can we do to increase it? What projects can be done? What policies can be enacted that would increase our level of protection? So to answer that question, we look first at sort of the capital project side, and we investigate, what else can we build? We build a lot in Stormwater 1.0. Can we put in more storage tanks? Can we put in relief sewers? Can we separate some sewers? Do we need to add more restrictors? We looked at areas of the village where those dots were not as green as we wanted them to be, and we said, where can we do things? And we developed a total of 17 concept level projects to achieve that goal. As the bullet point mentioned here, it could be a combination of typically, there's not a lot of open space in the village, so typically we look for where can we place an underground storage vault. Often it's a park, could be a school, maybe it's within the right of way. And then we build from there. So we know we can put stormwater here. How can we best take advantage of that? Where can we bring in a relief sewer? How can we do this or that? And that's how those 17 projects were developed. And the goal of each one, lower the hydraulic grade line, which is basically the water level, trying to get that freeboard down to make those red dots green. And so this slide shows those 17 projects. You'll notice there's kind of 3 different color bands. I'm going to skip forward and maybe we'll come back to this. Because this was the step really where the engagement with the task force really kind of stepped up. And we had a lot of back and forth. Because I think we all recognize that implementing all 17 projects is probably cost prohibitive. Any type of remediation project like this is expensive. So 17 of them is going to be a very expensive program. And even if money wasn't an object, you need to evaluate, they're not all going to have the same effectiveness, right? We got to think about, does it make sense to recommend every project because they don't have that same effectiveness? So we needed a sort of a metric to be able to evaluate that. And We went back and forth on a lot of different factors of what weighs into a benefit. How do you calculate the benefit per cost? And really what we settled on was a simplified approach, where we just looked at how many residences would be in a project area, and then what is the cost of the project, so what is the cost per residence? And it was just not intended to be an exact number of, this is the cost to fix this particular residence. It's just a metric to be able to compare project to project. And the third bullet on the screen here, this one's really important. So that cost per residence was compared to the cost to do an overhead sewer conversion. You're probably generally familiar with that. But a lot of older homes, if they had basement plumbing, that plumbing would go out the bottom of the house and out to the street. And it would be subject to whatever the elevation of the sewer in the street goes up, the basement's gonna flood. Newer homes, going back decades, have overhead sewers where any basement plumbing is collected and pumped up to near ground level, and then it drains out. So that the street level and the basement level are disconnected. There's no longer a direct connection there. It's a very, a very robust system in terms of flood protection. So it's a very micro level, right? It only addresses one home at a time, but it's a way to provide that flood protection. So we wanted to have some way of comparing, look, how much are we gonna spend per residence on a capital side, when we know there's a way to address it on the individual side. So if I go back to this slide, that's where the color coding kind of comes in. That line between the yellow and the middle blue, that cost per overhead sewer, we assume it to be about $15,000. Now that's gonna vary depending on complexity and size of the house and a lot of different factors, but we're using that as an average. That $15,000, you'll see, kind of demarcates what's in the yellow versus the blue in terms of cost per residence. So based on that number, we're recommending the top 5 projects to be recommended projects to go forward towards implementation, because they can be addressed globally, publicly, on the infrastructure side, less expensively than if you were to do it on a home-by-home basis. We call those the Tier 1 projects. The Tier 2 is the band in the middle, where they don't quite meet that metric, but we think they still have some value, and we'd recommend continuing to evaluate those. Things could change, maybe properties become available, who knows, things could happen in the future that would change some of the calculation there. And then the Tier 3 projects just are not close to that line, and we don't think it makes sense to pursue them on a capital project side. So as I mentioned, there were five capital projects that we are recommending, that the task force is recommending the village consider going forward for implementation, and they're listed there at the bottom. So this is really the answer to the second bullet. Remember, the first was, what's the existing level of protection? The second is, what can be done to increase the level of protection? These are the 5 projects that we're recommending. I've got 2 slides left. I'm kind of now changing hats to be somewhat representative of the task force in the village, as well as obviously on the consultant side. A lot of these are sort of policy issues and initiatives of the task force, aside from just our modeling work. But first bullet, as I just said, we are recommending implementing the Tier 1 projects and continuing to refine the Tier 2 projects. That work would be done through the village's capital improvement planning. I don't pretend to be an expert on the ways and means of how that happens here. If there's questions on that, I'd probably direct those to staff. But that's our first bullet. The second one is equally as important as the capital recommendations. We talked about the overhead sewer conversions being a flood protection measure. We're recommending, and the task force has recommended, establishing a rebate program, because we recognize those 5 projects don't address the entire village, and those areas where it's been decided that it's not cost effective to address them on a capital side, so there needs to be some way for those homeowners to get some level of protection. So we're recommending a rebate program, with the details to be developed. Typically, it's usually a 50-50 cost share, and you need to decide what's the budget amount, the annual budget, those are details that will be worked out. But what's important is the, kind of the first sub-bullet, we would prioritize homeowners who are not in one of the tier 1 project areas. So if there's someone, and we want to make sure that those homes in the areas where we don't have a project, a cost beneficial project, that they are the first ones in line to be able to get the rebate program. If there happens to be, annual budget beyond that, then it would be open to village-wide residents. Third main bullet here, reassess downspout disconnections. This was kind of an initiative of the task force. When the system was originally designed, there was some effort done to identify those connections. If I'll take a step back, older homes when they were built, a lot of times the roof drains or the footing drains were tied directly into the sanitary sewer and out to the street. And it really bypasses a lot of the stormwater efforts. So if there are, say, inlet restrictors, that water is going directly into the sewer system. And if you've got maybe an 8-inch sanitary sewer, combined sewer in the street, it doesn't take a lot of homes, roof drains, and footing drains to really overwhelm that. So it's an important piece. And so the village is developing a program to really try to take another look at identifying any homes that may have been missed initially. It would have those connections that we want to eliminate. Other recommended actions, the village currently provides technical assistance. The recommendation would be to continue that and perhaps enhance that for homeowners who are maybe looking at private property drainage issues, rear yard, nuisance flooding, things of that nature, to be able to continue that system. And of course, ongoing efforts to pursue grants, other funding opportunities. And then the last bullet here is looking at the development side, based on the information we've gained from all the modeling and the knowledge we have of the system, looking at ways to supplement development, if there are ways that we can incorporate added features that will really benefit the overall system, try to prioritize that as well. So that would be the end of the presentation. I'll be able to take questions.
Just that nobody gets unbelievably nervous. There is nothing to be voted on this evening. So just, this is just to give everybody a chance to become a civil engineer in the next few months. I have one question.
Sure.
And admittedly, it might be an unfair question, but do you have any idea about a timeline if the board were to adopt the 5 projects this year? How long would you estimate it might take to complete those 5 projects?
I mean, I know that's been contemplated. It has a lot to do with how you would finance them, how quickly you would do them. I mean, generally, the upfront lag is, I won't say a year, maybe somewhat less than a year to get the design and the permitting going to be able to start construction. So then once you do that, you're probably a project a year, depending on how aggressively you wanted to pursue them and finance them.
Because I think the project, the berm project, I remember distinctly because I think it was my second meeting on the village board. Some financing came up or something, and I began to wonder what I got myself into. And it took us close to 20 to 25 years to complete that project. Now, that was all of the residential streets
Right.
and everything. So you think maybe 3 years it would be possible to get the 5 projects done?
From a design and construction standpoint, yes, but I think it really,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand I see Julian is sitting right near the door. He wants to get out that door as quick as he can.
And let me just add one more layer too that hasn't been mentioned, where if it's underground storage that we're adding, having an agreement and arrangement where that storage tank is gonna go will also take time. I think that's part of what took time before, was to reach agreements with the property owners and the institutions where the tanks are located. And so there are a number of kind of components to moving forward, but from a strict design and construction, getting ready for construction, that window is relatively short in year or two terms, but there are a number of components to it.
Mayor.
Sorry, trustee Sucker.
So speaking of financing, one of your items said, grants, going for grants. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, what kind of grants are available for this kind of project?
I think the common ones that are typically available, I say typically, the MWRD funds a lot of projects, kind of ongoing. So that the amount of their funding has sort of changed year to year, but typically every year there is some amount of MWRD funding available. Enough to really alter the picture on the numbers here, probably not. That's probably the main regular source of funding. But then there can be things like, say we get a major storm, there can be, if there's a disaster declaration, there becomes federal money that becomes available through different programs. So it really depends on what the future will bring.
Trustee Klein?
Yeah, I'm just curious, where do we get the most bang for our buck? Overhead sewers, very expensive, from my point of view, but the retention ponds, would that be a better use of money before we start going individual homes?
Well, that's what we try to establish in this list of looking at, on a general cost per home basis, what does it cost to do it for the capital side versus the home by home side, right?
Mhm.
And that's how we set the recommended projects. So projects that we established would cost less to do capital improvements, those are the yellow projects that we're recommending. The projects that cost more than that number, I don't know that we have a hard and fast rule there, that's why we're saying tier 2 should be somewhat evaluated further. But those are areas where we would target the rebate program to say, maybe it's more effective to spend that money home by home in these areas, and to really target the rebate program to those areas that aren't in the tier 1 projects.
Now, in the past, when the Park District redid a park, they would include these underground tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Have they weighed in on this, the Park District, on these projects that you, tier 1?
So yeah, we've talked to the Park District about it, but the tricky part of that is our schedule and how that would line up. So we already have some tanks in some of their parks, like you said, but we have definitely talked to them about what their construction schedules look like and where our potential projects might be.
No, because I'm just thinking that I know the Park District has a schedule of when they redo parks, and they've announced, like, what, in 2025, what parks they're gonna redo. Can we jump on their schedule so we don't have to tear up a park twice?
Absolutely. We could absolutely do that. And we've had those preliminary conversations, but at the time, we didn't know what our construction schedule looked like. So if, for example, if there was an opportunity, then we could juggle our projects to sync up with that.
Okay,
But
thank you.
the restoration of the park is the cost for that is much lower than the restoration of a street or the pavement. So we would definitely work to that end to maximize the construction dollars.
Hence, we would get more bang for our buck.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments or questions?
It's a question.
Trustee Robinson.
If you were to choose two of the most egregious properties to target first, which two would they be?
Of the tier 1 projects?
Yeah.
You can see the project costs and you can see the number of residences. I think, like Jeff was saying, and like we analyzed and reviewed them with the task force, I think that speaks to the biggest bang for the buck. I think the South of Golf Course project is one of the best, but as John alluded to, that would require coordination with the golf course. And we've had preliminary conversations to get an idea on timeline, but we would obviously need to get an agreement in place before we could start ripping up the golf course to put in the tank.
Trustee Kuhn?
Has there been broader regional conversations about this? I'm thinking about the metropolitan area and where that conversation has been in terms of being able to share resources or work as part of a larger collaborative.
So MWRD and the village have a strong partnership when it comes to stormwater management. We've been successful in obtaining grant funding from them, project after project. All of our green alleys to date have been partially funded by MWRD, and so they know what we're capable of, and we have a good track record with them. The village in the 80s instituted a stormwater ordinance that's put into place regulations on how much stormwater could, be put into the system with new development. And MWRD has since more recently put in a regional ordinance that is a little bit stronger than what we had in the 80s. And so, again, a good partnership, between the village and MWRD. And MWRD is part of all of our permitting for new development. And so we work with MWRD to ensure all new development is in sync with what the region needs for managing stormwater runoff. In addition to that, one of the task force members is a former executive director of the MWRD. And so he was we had talked with him before the creation of the task force and then kind of furthered that relationship with him being a member of the task force. And he provided a regional perspective at every meeting that he was able to attend and all of the discussions and brought a wealth of knowledge. And so we continue to want to partner with the MWRD and look at this at both a regional level and a local level.
And then on the state level, what does that look like in terms of capital funding or support?
There are, and maybe Julian wants to speak to this, there are some low-interest loans that are available for stormwater management, and so maybe, Julian, you want to elaborate on these?
Yes, absolutely. The Illinois Environmental Protection Agency offers some revolving loan funds, makes it available to communities, among other projects for this specific type. They are much lower interest than market rates for bonded debt. But the EPA loans do come with increased administrative requirements as far as, bidding and Davis-Bacon and some extra work that's certainly would need to be complied with in order to be eligible for those loans. The other benefit to the EPA is that they can go out as far as 30 years, whereas a regular typical bonded debt, GO 20 would be the target. So that in future meetings and discussions, absolutely those are decisions to be made, whether the EPA path is viable. If interest rates go down on general bonded debt, perhaps that's a better option for us, but yeah.
Okay.
Certainly an
Thank you.
option.
Great. Thank you. To be continued.
That completes my report this evening.
Thank you. Next item is report of our Corporation Counsel, Michael Lord.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. Good evening, everyone. Item A is an ordinance which was on the consent agenda tonight and was adopted at the beginning of the meeting. Item B is a resolution for first reading and approval tonight. This resolution authorizes the publication of the 2025 official zoning map for the Village of Skokie in accordance with Section 11-13-19 of the Illinois Municipal Code. In that context, this is really a housekeeping matter that is routinely done. The map is to update and reflect the current status of zoning through the village. The director of the Skokie Community Development Department has reviewed the prior official zoning map and has made all the necessary changes in order to assure the accuracy of the 2025 official zoning map. Mayor, I request board action on this tonight.
A motion on the resolution authorizing the publication of the official zoning map for the Village of Skokie is in order. trustee Klein, seconded by trustee Sutker. Are there any comments or any questions? If not, I'll call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker? Aye. Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Lovan? Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes.
Thank you. That would conclude my report for this evening.
Thank you. Next item is a matter of,
Can I get something under unfinished business? I wanted to ask for an update on the draft ordinance concerning short-term rentals. Because it's now been about 8 months since we decided to move forward with the draft ordinance to regulate and permit short-term rentals in Skokie. So I wanted to ask for an update and ask whether we're still on track to review a draft ordinance by the end of the term.
I'm looking to see if John or me, yeah? So, we've had a number of conversations between legal department and planning department. We're finding in the process of trying to get it done that there actually is a lot going on around the country that is evolving and actually very productive for some of the discussion that has been held. In particular, by example, we've we've reviewed a recent American AMA Association meeting, seminar, that actually dealt exclusively, I'm sorry, ABA, thank you, American Bar Association, which dealt at length, it should be medical given the amount of information in it. It really at length dealt with different evolving approaches. There also was a recent publication that gave a lot of different information, and in talking to the planning department, there are some really forward-thinking approaches to it. So that's a short way to say that we haven't brought anything back at this point because there's a lot to consider and evaluate. Our intention, though, is to move it along quickly, and we'll work with John in terms of scheduling and see how it works out. But it just seemed every time we sat down to try to codify that it was nuanced, much more nuanced, as some of our discussions here have demonstrated, and some of the input has demonstrated. It's front and center amongst things that we want to get done, and we've had routine meetings on it. So.
Thanks, I appreciate the update. Thank you.
I'd also offer to the trustees, if they wanted, some of the material we've been looking at, we would share as we get closer to our drafting.
That would be great. Thank you.
next item is a matter of new business, accessory dwelling units. And I would ask for a motion to refer the accessory dwelling units to the Housing Subcommittee. Trustee Sutker, seconded by Trustee Klein. Are there any comments or questions? Trustee Johnson, did you have any?
Yeah, so I'd requested this agenda item, and if it's the decision of the board to refer this to the Housing Subcommittee, I'd like to support that. But just to be clear, that was not my request. So I'm requesting that we do essentially what we did with Trustee Klein's short-term rentals proposal last year, which is to kind of direct staff immediately to present to the board draft regulations to permit accessory dwelling units in Skokie. The Housing Subcommittee of the Plan Commission, it's meant to advise the Plan Commission about housing policymaking, but in this case, the Plan Commission has already reviewed and has already supported a recommendation for ADUs in Skokie. As we all know, they held a very thorough review of affordable housing policies in early 2023, and this included a recommendation to permit ADUs. They received a good amount of public feedback on it. So I think sending it to this housing subcommittee and then back to the plan commission would delay this a lot. So I guess similar to short-term rentals or the land trust, would it be possible, or is there interest in the board in moving kind of straight with directing staff to prepare draft parameters to regulate ADUs?
Trustee Sucker.
I'd like to see what the subcommittee comes up with when they look this over. I mean, we just appointed some really fantastic people to that committee, and I think they might have a lot to say about how to proceed forward and have good ideas. And so to me, it would be nice to have them be part of that process.
Sure. Could we add a timeline or kind of some sense of, I'm worried that since they only meet quarterly, that if we don't kind of give some kind of direction in terms of a timeline, that this could get pushed into 2026 or...
I don't know that we, at this point, I don't know what their timeline is in most things.
So they had their first meeting last week, and they have set up some goals and working group, and so they're moving, but the subcommittee was designed to meet quarterly, and so I think at this point, with only having one meeting behind them, setting a specific timeline is very challenging. The issue with ADUs is that accessory dwelling units is that there's a lot of potential regulations that need to be considered. And so unlike maybe short-term rentals that are being registered, that's a municipal code kind of change, this is a land use zoning matter that may need to talk about setbacks, that may need to talk about utilities, and are the utilities if it's an accessory dwelling unit outside of the existing structure, how will the utilities be served? And so there's a lot of different nuances, such as if another family unit is now living in the accessory dwelling unit, what does that mean for the neighborhood in terms of impact and parking? And so all of those types of items need to be thoroughly vetted. And I think at this point, to put a specific timeline on it, it is unfair to the working committee, the subcommittee.
And don't forget, we just talked about flood control and permeable surface is going to enter into this also.
That's right.
Trustee Kuhn.
John, what's the timeline as far as the recommendation for establishing the land trust and how we move forward on that?
The land trust is an item that the staff has been giving considerable time to, and a recommendation will be forthcoming to the board within the next, I would say, next 3 meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, it seems like that's the direction of the board. I do want to say, the staff and the Plan Commission gave us this ADUs recommendation in early 2023, and if we take this housing subcommittee path, the board isn't going to take action on, isn't probably going to finalize this till 2026, if not later. I wish we could take a little faster approach, but I'll respect the board's choice here.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker? Aye. Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pursulvin? Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes. Next item on the agenda is Plan Commission case. Chairman Paul Luke with Johanna Neiden.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the board. I bring to you one case tonight, that is case 2024-39P, request for a special use permit at 7802 Frontage Road. At the December 19th meeting of the Plan Commission, we reviewed a request of 7900 North Cadwell LLC on behalf of Pure Fleet LLC for a special use permit for an automotive repair facility at 7802 Frontage Road. that. Okay. Pure Fleet LLC provides car wrapping, which is a process of applying vinyl covering to the exterior of vehicles. The process is wholly completed in the interior of the building. The use requires 11 parking spaces, which are accommodated on site. No interior build-out is necessary at the unit. It is in complete move-in readiness. Plan Commission concurred with staff's recommendation based on the proposed positive findings of facts and subject to the recommended special use conditions. The Plan Commission recommends that the case, or that the request be approved on the vote of 6 ayes with 3 members absent.
A motion on the recommendation to grant a special use permit, 7802 Frontage Road, Plan Commission case 2024-39P, would be in order. Trustee Johnson, seconded by Trustee Klein. Are there any comments or questions? Trustee Klein.
Sounds more like a sign shop than it does an auto repair.
It's not a sign shop. They mainly, I think they do some commercial work on vehicles, so, with vinyl coverings. But I think, I've talked to them, most of their vehicles are for customizing a personal car.
Thanks.
I mean, you could literally change the color of the car in less than a day.
I thought that's what they called paint.
Call the roll.
Trustee Sutker? Aye. Trustee Robinson?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce-Lovan? Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes.
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Paul, just wait 1 second. I've been meaning to ask you this for a while, and I made a note of it this evening. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Would you take just a couple minutes and maybe tell the village board and those who are viewing the meeting this evening remotely a little something about, say Timothy's Cafe?
Oh, absolutely.
This last Saturday was a great performance and an overwhelming crowd, but also it's a great cause.
We had Howard Levy perform a concert. St. Timothy's Coffee House is basically a endeavor of my co-producer Sandy Wong and myself, and it's under the auspices of St. Timothy's Lutheran, and we provide folk music, for the North Shore at a very reasonable price. Our tickets are only $20, and we have 6 concerts a year, starting in the fall of September, October, November. Then we take a hiatus in December, but in January, Howard Levy came forward and asked if we can provide, give them a date in January. So then our regular series will start again in February, March, and April. And we provide refreshments at the intermission, and all the proceeds from the refreshments, which is all donations, go to help fund our charitable needs, to feed people, who clothe people in the area who desperately need it. We have no paid workers. Most of the work is all volunteers of St. Timothy's. The only paid people we have is the sound technician and, of course, the performer.
And one volunteer also volunteered for the Stormwater Task
Joanne and
Force.
Colin are volunteers, and they also enjoy the music, too. So I encourage you all to come out and, sample the work that we have.
It is, and it is professionally done, and it's frequently simulcast.
Yes, actually, we're in partnership with WFMT, and I think they'll produce the next 3 concerts live on air for us, and they featured on their folk stage program, which is on Saturday nights at 8 o'clock.
Mayor, as long as you're giving a little praise, you should mention Howard Levy, since he's a Skokie resident, or
Yes.
that he is an internationally known harmonica player who's played with, not just with small groups, but symphonies
And also
all over the world.
Grammy-nominated performer. He's played with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, some of the best jazz groups in the country. But we had the honor of having him last week. It was very nice.
And if anybody does have the opportunity, look into it. I think it's
Well, thank you, Mayor, for
it's a
letting me-
wonderful evening.
Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to tell you a little about St. Timothy's.
It's a
Foundation.
great cause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to address the village board? Happy New Year.
Are there any comments from members of the board? Okay. If not, then I will give a comment from the podium. Thank you. All right, good evening, Mayor and trustees. So for the 27th meeting in a row, I'm speaking in protest of the board's really overt political hiring and corruption involving attorneys in Skokie's legal department. For over half a century, it has been the board's practice to appoint its own political party leaders to public positions in Skokie's legal department and then misappropriate those attorneys. And this problem has been really an open secret in Skokie for a long, long time. This month, during my presentations, I want to comment on a really important moment in the history of this problem. In 2002, Mayor, you nominated a new league corporation counsel. And to the surprise of many, you broke with tradition and you nominated somebody who was not a member of your local political party, the Skokie Caucus Party. And you received a lot of criticism for this, some of it very unfair criticism. I'm going to share some excerpts from a really excellent summary from the Tribune about what happened. Quote, a narrowly split board of trustees hired Skokie's new corporation counsel Monday night. Dissenters were upset over the way Mayor George Van Duzen made the choice and over his decision to pick someone unaffiliated with the ruling caucus party. Van Duzen and 3 trustees voted to hire J. Patrick Hanley, a Wilmette attorney currently in private practice. Trustees Piper, Bromberg, and Gelder voted against the appointment. Bromberg and Gelder said Van Duzen could have chosen attorneys who live in Skokie and who have been involved in village political life and the caucus party. Niles Township Democratic Committeeman Cal Sutker agreed and said he had not been consulted. He said, quote, I chair the Township Caucus Party and I am integrally and intrinsically involved in the Caucus Party of Skokie. The decision was done without consultation with me, which has never occurred in 27 years, meaning going back to the mid-1970s. So these are direct quotes from elected officials saying that local political parties have had and should have control over appointments in Skokie's public legal department. These are direct quotes of elected officials defending political hiring. I will say more about this at our next meeting, but I hope that this article shows how really insincere it is for the board to pretend that its appointment process for attorneys is, or really has ever been, inclusive or nonpartisan. All of you know that the board's appointment process is highly politicized. And if the board does not reform this process, the political corruption in Skokie's legal department will continue. It will be perpetuated. So that's why I continue to speak out. I brought copies of the article for all of you to read. I hope you all will.
3 minutes.
I'll pass it down right now.
Okay. Trustee Klein?
Thank you, Mayor. A few meetings back, I shared with everybody about a bunch of things that some local people were doing, and while I was saying this and learning about these things that the people were involved in, donations, working with underprivileged, I let loose that I found something that Mr. Lorch had done, and I said it out loud, after I did that, a funny thing happened. I was in the Jewel, and a lady came up to me, and the lady told me, she says, I heard what you said about Mr. Lorch, and I'm sorry, sir, to put you on the spot, but I live a sheltered life. And the lady told me that because of the work that Mr. Lorch did, that anywhere between 500 and 1,000 kids get to go to summer camp. And this lady also told me that scores of teenagers and young adults are given summer jobs because of this work. Then another time, I got a phone call from somebody letting me know about the money that Mr. Lorch has raised for the Skokie Community Foundation. Thought that was interesting, too. And then another person, no, it was a couple, actually, had told me about a festival that Mr. Lorch runs every 2 years that brings about 30 to 40,000 people. It's a free festival, not only bringing music, but also giving, connecting people with services. So I bring this up only because all three of these groups of people asked me the same question in pretty much the same way. And they asked me why a trustee would keep going after him. And I thought about it, and I wondered, what makes a person do, or why does a person do this? So I have decided that from now on at the meetings, I'm going to talk about things that Mr. Johnson has told us. His words, his postings. I'm going to be talking about his fair housing or low-income housing that he proposed but constantly votes against. Old Orchard, going after a pregnant woman because she didn't go to enough meetings. Can't wait to bring up lawsuits.
Trustee.
I know, but I'm sorry.
3 minutes.
I only, that's it?
That's 3 minutes.
Okay, then I'll start with specifics at the next meeting.
And just to be
Thank
clear,
you.
I've never criticized the attorneys. I'm criticizing the board for its political hiring. My criticisms are not
I
against
thought your
staff
3 minutes were up, sir.
3 minutes.
My criticisms are against the mayor and
Everybody-
trustees. That's all.
Everybody gets their 3 minutes, period. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the board? If not,
I move we adjourn.